Hi there, Neil from David and Move. Today I'm going to take a look at the components inside the box of Imperium Classics, a deck building game from Nigel Buckle and David Turczi, published by Osprey Games and featuring art from the Miko, who is of course famous for the West Kingdom series of games, a very distinctive art style there. So the game itself is a historically themed deck building game. The clatter there you heard was the things inside the box moving around. The box itself has a bit of text there explaining that the destiny of history's great civilizations lie in your hands. Then under the constant threat of attack, you must conquer new lands, oversee dramatic scientific and cultural advance, and lead the people into the era of empire. And you're going to do this as one of 8 civilizations, and in this version of the game there are 2 versions, the other being Legends. More on that in a moment. You have the option of some of those classically civilization building game factions like Carthage, Greeks, Macedonians, Persia, and so on. The game itself is for 14 years and over. You have 40 minutes per player playtime, so quite long for a deck builder. 1 to 4 players, and you can play it competitively or solo. It features 280 cards and 150 plus tokens, and near the little blurb there says deck building, resource management, and historical. Okay, before I dive into the cards, which are actually inside the box still at the moment, let's have a look at what else we get. We have a dice, or a die with a very large 1. I have a rulebook. In fact, 2 rulebooks, one for the main game and one for the solo game. Get back to those in just a moment. And then we have a few sheets of tokens and counters, very, very similar each one. We have a number of these hexagonal tokens with the almost the bowling skittles on there, and then these tokens here with like bricks and these chevrons, and then these are the actions and exhausted tokens, and then this bit is the difference between the 3 counter sheets being one part of a 3-part display against which your cards will be placed to form the commons pool of the game. And here we have the next counter sheet, and then the 3rd. Good thick cardboard, very clear, easy to see tokens, so very cool. Okay, but let's have a look then at what is inside this box. It's quite a chunky box. Not the biggest box, but certainly quite a deep box for a card game. And inside we have a rogue set of cards that's come loose from its housing. We have a range of cards inside this nice plastic insert with space there for the die and for the various tokens once they're punched. And each of these spaces for the cards is printed. You may or may not be able to see that there, but that says tributary, which is this particular deck of cards. And each of the cards represents either a civilization or something from the commons pool. Now, those of you who do like to sleeve your cards, if I zoom in a little bit, and by zoom I mean pick the box up, you may maybe not get sleeved cards in those spaces. I don't tend to sleeve cards myself unless I have to, so I'm not the best one to judge, but I would say probably not. In terms of sleeving those cards and still having space for the box. So what are some of these cards? Well, we have, as I mentioned, various faction decks. So here we have Carthage, and as you expect in most deck builders, you have a number of cards. Some of them are double-sided. Each deck for the civilizations is faction specific, and the different civilizations are very asymmetric by all accounts. They do vary quite substantially from one another, as you might expect from a deck building game. Tons and tons of iconography there. Icons in the corners, icons in the top corners, icons in the text. Lots of icons. Okay, so that's the Carthaginians. And who else do we have? We have Rome. It's worth noting that some of these decks are slightly bigger than the others, and you can tell that by the little code in the bottom there that simply says whether it's Legends or Classics, and what civilization, and then the card number. There are 23 cards for the Romans, 23 for the Carthaginians, but some of them do have slightly more or slightly less. And again, quite a nice card. Not the thickest cards I've ever seen, but they certainly feel quite nice to hold. Illustrations are wonderful. And each one has a nice flavour to it. These are quite interesting. These are the Unrest cards. There are faction specific Unrest cards, and then there is a set of common Unrest cards too. That's Rome. Who else do we have in here? We have the Celts, a slightly thicker deck here, 28 cards in this one. And there we have various cards relating to the different Celtic tribes. Vercingetorix there. Some of these names are familiar to me primarily through the Asterisk comics. Showing my ignorance perhaps as well as my age. Looking good though, those cards. What else have we got? I probably won't go through all of them, but just give you a sense. We have Scythia here. Lots of unique terms: exhaust, gain, garrison, free play, breakthrough. Tons of things to keep track on, it seems, in this particular game. Okay, what else have we got? This is one of the commons pool called Uncivilized. So this is interesting. It's like a mix of different things that everyone can have. We have shrines, invasions, mysticism, an oracle, farming. Cool. Okay, things that allow you to build up your civilization. Looking very, very good. What else have we got on this side then? We have the Greeks, seemingly permanent staple of every civilization game ever. Pericles, Corinth, on the Trojan horse, philosophy, Athens, Thessaly, all the things you might expect in a game featuring the Greeks. Peloponnese, Sparta. Cool. Okay, so the Greeks are a faction that covers a few different historical factions. We have Macedonia, who were themselves very closely in location, at least, to the Greeks in the historical world. So we have Alexander. Various mosaics, Alexandria in Egypt, Alexandria in Ariana, various cities called Alexandria around the world, Philip II, the Phalanx. Cool, tons of stuff there. Running out of space to put all these cards. Let's have a look at just a couple more with Persia. Should I go for the Persians? Yeah, let's have a look at the Persians. Another one that's commonly seen in civilization games. Very cool. Babylon. The thing that appealed to me about this game is that many of these names are and places. The history's been taken into account apparently within this game. It's still abstracted, as you might expect, but many of the cards do feature representations of real places, real people, real events. It always interests me when you have a game like that. This deck here is called the Civilized deck. Cool. What else do we have? We have tributaries. These are presumably nations that pay tribute to your empire. Ionians, Egyptians, Assyrians, the Kin, Olmecs. Some of these are from the other version of the game. which I'll mention more of when we get to the rulebook. Then we have the Vikings, possibly the only faction in here that are not seen in many other civilization building games, but always cool to have a game about Vikings. Cool. And then we have the wilderness. So these are called regions. So these are presumably location cards where you build your empire, I imagine. Okay, cool. One more deck of cards to go, and that deck is the Unrest, Fame, State and Solstice. Selection of things. Here we have the cards that presumably junk up your hand, as many deck builders have. King of Kings, various things that imply success, it seems. Oh, and then the cards that indicate whether you're an empire or still a barbarous nation. Okay, cool, so that's all the cards. Tons and tons of cards inside the box. Each card has its own space in there. Let's have a quick look at the rules. And as I was reading through the rulebook, it struck me that this rulebook is quite big, to be honest. We have a note about the two games. They're basically the same game. You just basically have different factions in the game. And the difference between them is the classics, which is this game, have the more classical civilizations, for want of a better description. So you do have those Greeks, the Romans and so on. When you think of a classical civilization, they're the two that tend to spring to mind, certainly for me. And then you have the Legends box, which is the other box. These are the more atypical civilizations for a civilization game. So you have the Olmecs, the Kin, and then we have some made-up ones like the Arthurians, the Atlanteans and the Utopians, as well as some that you will have heard of in other games like Egyptians, Minoans and so on. The Olmecs are there, which is cool, from South America, I want to say, but I might be wrong. Okay, so we have the brief description there of the differences between the games, a breakdown of the cards. Loads of icons, as you can see, loads of icons, and the rulebook is quite detailed in many ways. On my quick read through of it, which is good, but yeah, it's certainly a lot in it, quite dense for a non-war game. Historical game. I'm used to seeing rule books with that war game flavour that are very dense, but this is not a war game, but it is definitely a game with a dense rule book. And it seems that the first fairly chunk of pages there, 4 pages at least, just on setup, then how to play with the different actions that you can take, and the process of playing the game, how to reshuffle, how the game ends. The game ends in one of a few different ways, listed just here. No cards. Player develops their last card. The King of Kings card is flipped face down. The Vikings play a card, and in the Legends set, a couple of specific cards that the Arthurians and the Utopians could possibly play. You have scoring and collapse, which interestingly overrules even the scoring if a collapse happens during scoring, which is quite interesting. And then we have the keywords, and there are loads of these. I mean, loads of keywords and tons of symbols. Many pages. I think we start the keywords on page 14 and we go right the way through to page 19 before having a little bit about the strategy for each of the nations, as well as a grading to give you a sense of how hard they are to play. But one thing it doesn't seem to have, this rulebook, is a key to all those multiple symbols. I think the closest you get is this page towards the beginning, which gives you a sense that some are a suit, some are a development, which I suppose counts, but it is nothing separately that just has a symbol and then the name of the symbol. I think that's probably the closest bit just there, and that's slightly surprising. Maybe I've just not found it yet, but I find that slightly surprising in a game with so many symbols, and all those keywords are not on a separate piece of paper either, which again is quite interesting. But the rulebook itself certainly seems detailed, and interestingly though, it doesn't seem to have an example of play either, which is quite unusual, I find. And then we have the very similar thing, but dedicated to solo. And we have again the same format with the cards, the setup, the bot setup, playing against the bot, which again I like. Apparently each of the factions can be played as the player against any one of the other factions as a bot. So that's a ton of variety just in this one box. If you imagine each single faction of the 8 factions is playable against any one of the others, I mean, you can imagine tons and tons of variety just there. But in the rulebook there are tons of information about the bots and how to change things slightly for the bot. Actually, it reminds me very much of the Undaunted way of doing it. Just looking a quick skip through with the different things that the bots can do, depending on which faction you are. Of course, David Turtsey did do the solo mode for the Undaunted games as well. We do have difficulty levels ranging from Chieftain to Overlord, with the most challenging being Overlord. And then we have a campaign mode where you can string a few games together and try and play your way through those different difficulty levels, and does include a Supreme Ruler mode, which sounds incredibly difficult. And then finally we have those tables that detail the actions of the bots. Tons and tons of stuff, which is cool. And there is on the back of the card a quick reference guide. Okay, that is Imperium Classics, deck building game with a historical theme. Tons and tons of stuff packed in here. Be interesting to get my teeth stuck into this. If you like this video, please click that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.